finals, but that's the way it is. We're kind of running up against the wall of that. But we'll see. Hopefully it won't be. Hopefully we'll be able to get everything in on one again for the semester test, but I'll have to kind of reschedule. I totally forgot about that. And so it's iReady. I know this is probably the bad news. That'll be your last iReady test that most of you will take, except for you. That'll be the last one. Because you guys won't take another iReady. What tests are you going to take after that? Yeah, and I have no idea about the timing of that. As I understand it now, it's going to be a 14-day test. They're just going to sequester you in the mountains in a tent, and it'll be fun. I don't know any details about it at all about the ACT. Yeah. All you'll get is a small 4-inch knife to go hunt. And now that there's a bill in front of the state legislature to say rabbits are no longer livestock, they just be rabbits everywhere. I'm not making that up. There's a bill for that. We're just talking about that along with other bills too. They're going to be pretty amazing. So let's go ahead and finish this part up and then get to the west. This always takes a little bit longer. It's such a big deal. We got to the solid south, didn't we?
Yeah.
And so we got there. We had how many people could vote? What happened to voting numbers? Basically, there are two groups went, but what was the common denominator between the people who could not vote? Yeah, they were poor. And what were the laws that segregated the South? And they could no longer participate in what? Because of the Jim Crow laws of segregation, they couldn't participate in what? Yeah, commerce, the market. That's a big deal. So it's more than just simply saying, I'm not going to allow someone to shop at my store. It means they literally cannot participate in the market function regulated by the United States government. And what was the law passed in Mississippi about a literacy test? What did we call that? Yeah. And what was the tax they imposed? Yeah, poll tax. And also just blatant terror and, what? The convict lease system? What was the law that would be most commonly used? Yeah, vagrancy. So this is a big issue. Talk about the solid South and a small little bit of group. So think about it. They didn't do this. The group that would take power, basically the elite, most of the planter class, they didn't do this because they didn't like certain people, or they didn't do this just because it seemed like a fun thing to do at that moment. They had very specific reasons why they wanted this. And it doesn't necessarily mean about some kind of prejudice against somebody. They had reasons for this. Yes. Yes. Very important to understand that. They want to keep that status quo. And they might have changed the laws differently if the status quo would have been met in another way. They might not have done the Jim Crow laws or the grandfather's clause, or might have. Who knows what would happen, because it didn't happen that way. But we got to the South. Did we get to hear them? So this is going to be the most racist time in American history. And Nadar means the peak of racism. About 1890 to about the 1950s. The most racist time, not just in the United States, this is worldwide. Prejudice, rating people on race and color of skin, literally ranking people by color of skin. Eventually there'll be, it's considered to be 39 different races. They would rank them by hierarchy of races. And so this is worldwide. It's no coincidence that you're going to have, especially European, but also some American conquest of Asia and Africa. Colonization and justified by we're a superior race. That's what they would say. And also, no coincidence that this would be a dramatic increase in anti-Semitism. That was already there. Anti-Jewish prejudice would just explode in this era. And it was already pretty big. And so I gave you two examples in the United States, and I thought these were pretty powerful ones. This would be the height of lynching. And lynching is literally torturing somebody to death. Now, I think, and you probably think too, lynching is hate. But it's the process of it, and it's the torture, and it is illegal. It is murder. So this is not some legal process, even though the irony here of a man accused of rape because he potentially dated a white woman, justice. When it's clearly this is a murder. And they beat him intensely, to drug him out of jail. They were going to hang him outside of town, and so many people wanted to come watch the hanging that they did it in the town square. And here's another one, and this one is shocking because look, everyone came, they got the ties on, and they're posing for the picture. People lined up to get their picture taken with lynching. And these happen all over the United States. And the numbers here are low, probably, because people just would disappear. And maybe they were lynched, maybe not. We don't know. So the numbers from this NAACP map from years ago, I just give an idea to give you how it was nationwide. And this was done in the 1920s. And the reason I use that, even though we think the numbers are higher today, is to show they knew about it then. It wasn't like, oh, this was happening. We had no idea. But people just ignored it. There's a squirrel outside. We used to have bushes here. They took them all out. So it used to be like a squirrel highway. Squirrels would go back and forth. I miss it. Don't you miss that?
Well, it would be part-time.
Would it be?
Yes.
I'll put that on the test. I'll make sure I remember that when I grade your test too. But with that, you can see all states. Utah, they just didn't report it, but almost certainly there's something there too. So, Montana had a lot. Montana had a lot of lynchings. But the big concentration of areas would be right. And so with that, here's a cartoon of the lynching, and this one's a pretty powerful one, but I thought it was very appropriate. If you can't read it, because I know some of you back can't see it, it says in self-defense. This is Southern chivalry. If I hadn't have killed you, you would have grown up to rule me. I thought that was a pretty well done cartoon. It shows, what's going on. I thought that's well done. And so here are two more lynchings. And this one is in Kentucky and does not hide what happened. And supposedly the body was up there for a few days. This was in the teens of the 20th century. This was in the first decade of the 20th century. And they cut off his fingers, cut off his toes, and then hanged him, then burnt the body while it was hanging. And then they made postcards out of it. This is a postcard. See this in back? That's a postcard. This was not the only one. This is here in the United States. So this was the terror and the violence of anybody who complained about the restrictions, about Jim Crow, any number of things. And this spread to other. Here's, I thought, a very good cartoon. I couldn't find a better copy of it. So this is from the Almays. You have a little, there's a couple little things in the background, but here's the Mississippi Plan, what happens to African Americans. And once it started happening there, this we spread to anybody basically who was not white or of European, fully European descent. California Plan, and it's about Asian immigrants. So this could spread all over. In Montana, it was against American Indians. And that's what happened in the prejudice here. And so this has a long-lasting effect. And so what we have growing out of this will be called the lost cause. And the lost cause, that is this idea that the South was not fighting to defend slavery. It was a noble fight. They were defending themselves. Now, they saw back when the actual war happened, a just and defensive board to defend slavery. And they made it very clear in every single secession proclamation. Every single one said that. But here, no. We were fighting for something bigger and broader. It was not slavery. Slavery might have been a little issue, but it was so many other things. It was this broad idea of states' rights. Northern states were dominating us, and the government, the federal government, was trying to overthrow our position and impose high tariffs and dominate us. And there were disagreements about tariffs, and there were disagreements about the financial system and the power of the federal government. But that certainly was not what caused the Civil War, at least according to what they wrote down. And everybody knew in the 1850s that states' rights meant pro-slavery, just defend slavery. And so this was a really popular song after the war. I'm a good old rebel. It's just a good old rebel. It's actually a catchy little tune, but it's kind of glorifying those veterans as they when they went back. You weren't fighting to defend slavery. You were fighting this cause to defend slavery. I was just trying to defend my home. And therefore, the war was Northern aggression. The North started this war. The North attacked us. There didn't have to be a civil war if not for what the North did. Remember I told you about the Battle of Shiloh, and I went there and they said the war of Northern arrogance, and everyone cheered. That was that attitude. And everybody knew that if a state seceded, it was civil war. They knew about that. They knew what that would cause. So when they seceded, they knew they were starting it. So this is revising history. And that's where you start getting, by the 1890s, the term the war between the states. During the Civil War, nobody called it the war between the states. They called it the Civil War or the War of the Rebellion. Everybody, North and South. But now the war between the states implies it was just a fight between independent states, and the North wanted to impose the federal government on us. And that's a really big revision of history. And you could start seeing, they started making these monuments to the Civil War. This is in Virginia, the veterans would come out, and it would be covered with a Confederate battle flag. Not the actual flag of the Confederacy, the battle flag. And here they are, Confederate battle flags all over the front of the South Carolina Capitol. That was 5 years ago. And so that has still gone on. And so this is basically changing the history from a fight to protect slavery and worried about what might happen if the Republican Party grows too strong, to we were just nobly defending our rights. We are the true successors of the founding fathers. And so out of this, you have this basic idea. States' rights will become equal to the lost rights. And whenever you would see states' rights in history, this goes well into the 20th century, arguably through today. And what that meant going into the 20th century, pro-Jim Crow. So when they would start saying states' rights, it's pro-Jim Crow. In 1948, the Democratic Party would split and Southern Democrats would leave because fearful that Northern Democrats wanted equal rights. And they called that party, to protect Jim Crow, they literally called it the States' Rights Party. That's what everybody knew what it meant. When people said states' rights, it was code. It was code. And people who didn't know what it meant were willing, or were dupes. They were duped. And here's the big thing. The Confederate battle flag then became a symbol of that lost cause. Got to emphasize it. Confederate battle flag. And so, sure, it's an historic symbol. But when you saw the Confederate battle flag in 1920, it's talking about Jim Crow. 1960, it's the anti-civil rights flag. So it had a very powerful meaning. So this is the March to the Stennis Bridge. This is the Voting Rights March. This is April 1965. Really important marches, and they came out to protest it and waving the Confederate battle flag. And so that has a very big symbolic meaning. And I know some people are ignorant about what the Confederate battle flag would mean, but to a lot of people, when they wave it to this day, it has a powerful symbol. The squirrel's in the window. See him? squirrel's up there. I will name him Steve. Who likes squirrels? I got like squirrels, yeah. They're just rats with fuzzy tails, but I like them. So with that, and so even to this day, Confederate battle flag, people might not realize what they're doing, but it has very powerful symbolic meanings. It was pro Jim Crow, without a doubt. And so with that, what we have then is this kind of genteel elite racism, the white citizens council of whatever city. They would have these signs up and the sometimes it'd be billboards up. But I thought this was a really good one. And this is from the 1950s. I just chose this one to whatever city in the South. But there's that white elite rule. And you know that idea, you know, poor whites, you're not much, but you're closer to the elite than anybody else. Yeah, sure, you might not have the power I have, but we're alike. We can get popped at the same stand. And this is a pretty good one. Just because I chose it on purpose. You have the Confederate battle flag, which is amazing. The flag that literally tried to overthrow the US government now crossed with it. Squirrel wants, he keeps popping up. Who wants to let him? Come on in. Somebody. Let him into Mr. Larson. See, Scott. States' rights. This is the big racial integrity. That's keeping the races separate. And here is a card. This certifies that Talbot Field Jr. will assist in maintaining the tradition of segregation by all legal and moral methods. And that's 56. So that's the legacy of this. I wonder who Talbot is. Talbot. Is it Talbot? I want to add a Bert to it. And there really wasn't, you know, the Klan and these groups would kind of pop in and then they'd be pushed down to kind of make things look bad. Then they pop up again. And the Klan was a very, in fact, well, I'll come back to this. And so you're going to get a whole revision of history. A whole revision. You know, right after the Civil War, most textbooks were made in Boston. And so there was a lot of, you know, the rebels and we're going to really not talk about the South. That's why they talk about the Pilgrims and not Jamestown. That's why all of you know about the Pilgrims, because Jamestown was in the South, Virginia. But still, they start to revise it more and more. Going into the 20th century, it became routine for textbooks to talk about, you know, Reconstruction of Black misrule and talk about states' rights and literally write the war between the states. So the textbook I in high school actually said the war between the states, and I was corrected in class one time for calling it the Civil War. It's more properly the war between the states. Because it was just like, you know, oh yeah, that was what people called it then. And people start to believe that. They did not call it that in the Civil War. And did I tell you that in college I was told that slavery was a good thing, and it protected the slaves, and it treated the slaves really well because they were so valuable. Oh yeah, I had a professor tell us.
Do the professor teach?
American history. Rocky Mountain College.
Yeah.
Now I have two professors, the traveling professors, Dr. Rasmussen and English. Not just for that. I thought he was here before, but then I thought he was. But I remember said, no, slave. They treated the slaves fine because they're so valuable. Now you might ask, how would they think this way? Yes, sir.
It's fine.
Maybe. I'm sure that's something to do with it. Maybe that's why I keep doing it after so many years. Especially since I might not be able to do it for much longer. But that's what I'm teaching you now would probably be illegal in a lot of states now. Can't talk about racism. Might be here soon. So there's a proposal to state assembly now. But anyways, it says right here. This, you wonder why, how could people believe this? Well, here's a textbook from the 1960s. And it has how Negroes lived under slavery. Slave laws were not strictly enforced. What? I mean, that's insanity. Many Negroes were taught to read and write. Many were allowed to meet in groups and for preaching, for funerals, and for singing and dancing. They were visiting at night and sometimes owned guns and other weapons. What? Yeah, you're going to give slaves guns. But doesn't that fit in? Of course you give slaves guns because slavery was so great. Remember the positive good theory? And look at this. This is a slave ship. I want you to look at this for a second. Look how these kidnapped people are dressed. They look really good, don't they? There's like a luxury liner that came over and they agreed to be workers in the United States. Now you might say, no one believes they're workers. Oh, let's look at a textbook from 2021. If you don't know, that's a year and a half ago. It says the Atlantic slave trade between 1500s and 1800s brought millions of workers from Africa to the southern United States. Implying they were just workers coming in to get a job, to get a gig. That's now, Pop Mifflin, who made the textbook, has agreed to change that. In the next edition, they changed that, but that was 2020. No, we did not have that textbook here. And no, it does not say that in our textbook, but the point is it's still being taught. Yeah. Don't use all of the United States. How Mifflin's a massive publishing company. It's all over the US. We don't have it in Helena, but yeah, it's nationwide. What's that?
The Mississippi River.
Oh, you're talking about from the 1950s?
Yeah.
I mean, actually, that's 63.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the name of a very inaccurate movie about it, but yeah, we'll mention it a little bit when we get to it in April. Yeah. About the murder of 3 civil rights workers and the FBI cracking the case. They actually went down and they bribed people in that case. If you watch the movie, it's nothing about it. Yeah.
So, wasn't the point of the life? That's the thing that sounds like.
Well, if you say that it was bringing in workers and it was all slavery so bad, that justifies it. But, if I said slavery wasn't that bad, then it must have been, no one really was complaining about slavery. Therefore, the North started the Civil War. And what was the goal of the North starting this whole thing? Yeah, well, not just rule them, to punish them because they hated the South. And that's where we get the. Oh, I almost forgot. I thought I put this picture up here. So this was during the 2021 insurrection of the Capitol. And there were Confederate flags all over the place. And whatever about that. And I don't like Confederate flags. I don't like Confederate battle flags and those kind of things running through the US Capitol because I know about the Civil War. I don't like US flags with different colors on it because like the US flag. But there's people holding the Confederate battle flag, there's Trump stuff, but whatever. It's not even about that. They're on a monument with the Confederate flag. This is a monument in Washington, D.C., near the Capitol for the 54th Massachusetts. That was the first Black regiment to fight in a battle in the Civil War for the United States. And you just really just not have to give a damn about the history to do that. And so I thought that was a pretty telling photo. Yeah, seeing Confederate. Of course, they showed people running through the Capitol with Confederate battle flags, and people said no one has ever done that before. Heck, states' rights members of Congress had Confederate battle flags in their offices in the Capitol. So that actually happened in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. So let's get to this. You see Mass right here, Massachusetts. So why did they do it? This is what they call the Reconstruction myth. And the myth was the whole reason the North started the Civil War so they could invade the North or invade the South and conquer it because they hate the South. They're too free. They hate them. And this was perpetuated as part of the Lost Cause. So this was a Northern invasion. It was a Northern invasion because they hate the South and are jealous of the chivalry and honor of the South. And so Reconstruction was not an effort to bring equal rights, as flawed as that might have been. It was an effort or an example of black misrule. In fact, that was going to be the punishment for the South. They would put black Republicans in power because they know they would destroy the South. But the South fought back. Yes.
The South perpetuated this myth that slavery was good. I mean, I know why they actually having in power. Why would they allow that?
Remember the positive good theory? That the slaves were civilized because if they're left on their own, they're like savages, civilized, so they can't govern. So that would be the argument. So slavery is keeping them under control or helping. Yeah. But next time we'll start bringing a bottle of water. And with that, so we're coming to one of the most important movies ever made. It's called The Birth of a Nation. It was made in 1913. The special topics, I've shown this fast, kind of going to do it next semester in my special topics class. I haven't shown it for a long time. It's basically created modern motion pictures. It's the first full motion picture that had a full storyline, the full plot line, the way they used cuts, the way they staged it, the way they designed it, the way they used the camera angles, would basically create movie making. D.W. Griffith, we see the name right here, invented movies. He was a brilliant filmmaker. And he made this movie about how the South, or the birth of a nation, meaning the Southern nation emerged victorious after the Civil War, after being put down by Northern aggression. So the goal of the movie is kind of shocking. And the hero? Well, the book it was named after is called The Klansman. And the hero, the Ku Klux Klan. Who won the victory? The Ku Klux Klan. Now, the Klan had died. There was no real Ku Klux Klan anywhere until this movie. But the Klansmen made it, beating back the Northern Army and the evil, crooked freedmen. And see, this was very common at that time. It would be a white actor in dark face and makeup. Same here, makeup on. And the Klan is the hero. And the villains, former slaves, but the biggest villain, the North and the United States Army. That's the villain. And here the Klan beating him back. Now, I do take some comfort in this, of the Klan being the heroes, because you notice the Klan doesn't look like they have plungers on their head. And I take comfort in the plunger heads. Woodrow Wilson was president when this came out. A Democratic president. He actually was the governor of New Jersey, but he was a Southerner by birth. And he was a history professor. And he was fully ingrained in the lost cause. Here's a quote that Griffith put on here. It's not about the movie, but it's a quote about Wilson's history of the South. And it says, the white men were roused by a mere instinct of self-preservation, until at last there had sprung into existence a great Ku Klux Klan, a veritable empire of the South, to protect the Southern country. That's the president of the United States. Anybody want to guess which president would establish Jim Crow for the federal government? Any guesses? Wilson's a complicated president. He's a good example of so many complicated presidents we have in our history. This is huge. All of a sudden, after this movie, with the Klan as a hero, guess what emerged again? A new Ku Klux Klan. The KKK came back. It was much more than just trying to protect this Southern way of life. It was really anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish, anti-Mormon. Really, that's power. And it was all over. The Klan emerged in Montana. Not so much in the South. Not so much there, but it was huge in the plains. The Klan basically took over the state of Indiana. They would become a powerful political figure, and depending on whatever state was powerful. Some states like some states like Iowa, the Klan was all Democrats. Indiana, they're all Republicans. So they're equal opportunity. Whatever party would welcome the Klan.
Did the Klan like exist during the Civil War?
No, that's only after.
So this,
That's winning Reconstruction.
oh.
Winning
not
Reconstruction. See, they're saying Reconstruction was this invasion. I saw a picture of my hometown in Miles City with the Klan walking down the street, which is always a surreal thing. Yes, the Klan was strong here. And it's no coincidence. This coincided with the emergence of Jim Crow laws, with lynchings, the nadir of racism. It's a really good movie. That's horrible. Silent movies are kind of hard for us to watch. Does anyone ever watch a full-length silent movie? Not just a few clips, but a full-length. A few people have. I mean, they're really. It just takes a while to get your mind into it. This is really good, but you have to. We're just not used to it, and they really overact because it's silent, so they have to exaggerate things. And you see that acting style go on well into the 1950s, and then they really would tone it down to almost like underacting, and then understating. I would highly recommend. I'll talk about this in my special topics class beginning of next semester. There's a great horror. A couple great horror movies that are silent. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and what's the other one? Oh, Nosferatu, of course. I would highly recommend those. But back to this. So this coincided with a wave of Confederate monuments. Now, unlike the first monument waves after the Civil War, mostly in the North to commemorate those who had died during the war, we saw the same thing in World War I. There's a big monument in front of the courthouse in Missoula, for example, from World War I. Huge monuments. These were different. Monuments, these were the symbols of the lost cause. These were glorifying Confederate generals and Confederate victories. And they were used very consciously to enforce Jim Crow laws. And so this is Lee Circle. This statue had just been removed from Richmond. This statue 2 years ago. And Lee Circle after Robert E. Lee. And it's on what's called Monument Row. And it was all these Confederate monuments, all on one road in Richmond, Virginia. And I chose that one because this was all over the South. But they did it there for one very important reason. That road was the border between the black neighborhood and the white neighborhood. And so anybody from the black neighborhood having to go over where the most commercial centers were in the city had to cross a bunch of Confederate monuments. And it was to remind them. This is why you have this neighborhood and it's not as nice. And these happen all over. Here's another good example of this. Oh, that's the Lee statue that just came down. This is the statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest going into Nashville, Tennessee. Remember, he's the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. And here in the late 1950s, they're putting his bust up in the Tennessee Capitol, with the leader of the Klan being celebrated by the Klan. Appropriately, of the Klan meeting in the state capital of Tennessee. They just took that out of the Capitol a year and a half ago. So these were pretty common. And so the monuments, important thing about monuments, yes, there's an element of trying to remember past heroes or past events. But the big thing is they tell you about yourself, what you want to know now about you. This is what they want you to know about the United States or Richmond or Helena. That's why Thomas Francis Meagher is in front of the state capitol. The vigilantes have been beaten. That pro-Confederate force had been beaten. And we got a war hero, a hero of Irish independence, a man who's probably murdered by the vigilantes. Speaking of that, so here's on the monument building. Jim Crow establishing the lynching, birth of the nation. Birth of the nation led to a big influx all over the country. The other big wave would be this anti-civil rights. Like a whole mountainside is carved in Georgia with Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee, and Jefferson Davis. This massive mountainside, bigger than Mount Rushmore. About this, it was done in the early 70s, kind of anti-civil rights. And oh, this one, this is a good one. Three years after birth of the nation. Anybody know where that is? Was. Yeah, that's Women's Park in Helena. It was the furthest north public Confederate memorial in the United States. And it was in that wave of the wave of the lost cause, kind of nostalgia after the birth of the nation. You know, this is 1960. Yeah. They took it down. It's been kind of removed and it's in a warehouse. So the city council took it down 3 years. So if you go into Women's Park today, right across from the Civic Center, you see there's this big orb sitting in the middle. You know the orb I'm talking about? Which it doesn't really fit the pedestal, so it's kind of an interesting thing. That's it. That's the fountain. But don't forget, Helena has a pretty strong Confederate background. As I told you before, I live a block away from Breckenridge Avenue, named after John C. Breckenridge, and I live 2 blocks away from Davis Street, named after Jefferson Davis. So, yeah, it's pretty strong Confederate background. That's kind of an amazing thing. Yeah, this part of the monuments were taken down. Yeah, I'm never sure what to do about some of the monuments. Some of the monuments I'm for taking down. That was totally out of place. I'm not sure about the orb either. That's a tough one. I'm not. The orb is kind of cool. It just doesn't fit the pedestal. It's yeah. So this is my personal favorite, even though this is a private one. This is Nathan Bedford Forrest in Nashville. And that could be the creepiest one ever made. And I guess if anybody deserves to have a creepy statue, it's him. It's still up, even though they're going to take it down. The private owner, part of the reason is because they have to clean it constantly. Because it's constantly people drive by with water balloons full of paint, red paint flowing out. Constantly. So soon after the Lost Cause, we're going to do one more book, Gone with the Wind. Anybody watch Gone with the Wind? You did? How, 4.5 hours?
It was a long time ago, and I did not like it.
Did you? It is also hard to watch if you're young. Did you like it? I think it's a good movie. It's hard to watch when you're young, but it's long. The hero, it's slave owners, the South. The villains, the Northern Army. That's the villain. And it was written after Birth of the Nation. It was very much inspired. And the Gone with the Wind myth would become even a more powerful myth in the South. Of the glorious plantations and the beautiful lives. That, well, they have it right here. This is how they would scroll. This was the scrolling credits in the movie made in 1937. Here's a pretty world of gallantry took its, here in this pretty world, gallantry took its last bow. Here was the last ever to be seen of the knights and their ladies fair of master and slave. So the slave owners, they call it knights. I guess it's kind of fitting that after if you know anything about real knights in feudal Europe, they're a bunch of thugs. But the slave owners and the mistress and the slaves like slavery. Of course, she would win the Academy Award, the first ever African-American woman in the Academy Award. This movie swept the Academy. But the villain, Northern soldiers. And the book was that lost cause myth, but they made it kind of pretty nicer. If you go to the South and see it, go to a plantation, it's very, they really hit the Gone with the Wind stuff. I mean, really hit it. And I like seeing these kind of locations, but some are, I mean, you would never know that there were slaves who built this. And this Gone with the Wind thing would be huge. Also, this movie, 4.5 hours long. It is a hard movie to watch, if especially younger. I do agree with you on that. First time I saw it, second time, it's good, but it's long. It swept the Academy Awards. It was a colorized movie, a big deal in 1937. So 38 Academy Awards, did great. There's another very well-known colorized movie in that same year that was seen as an abject failure. Someone says? Yeah, Wizard of Oz, yeah. Which has another big, really big historical movie. Not just when the movie came out, it's about historical events. And I should add, the movie's great. I love the Wizard. Except for flying monkeys, they terrify. I'll tell you about the historical. It's actually really historical. Like, wow, does it tell a story? But I gotta get you. I'm not gonna. Yeah. Nope. I'll tell you about it though. They represent something, but we're not there. We'll get to the movement. And so with that, one last concept we have to get to, sundown. And so outside of the South, northern towns, and this is North Plains in the West, they didn't want people from the South. They didn't want former sharecroppers, blacks, living in their towns. And so beginning at the turn of the century, they started passing city ordinances, or just did it, saying no one can live here. That's why they're called sundown. This is in Illinois. Can't be here after dark. You can't live in our town. We might let you come in and be cheap labor, but you can't live. And that's from an advertisement in Iowa. This is from New Jersey, sundown towns. And there were over 10,000 sundown towns in the United States. Almost none of them in the South. These were in a little bit in the East, but especially here, the Plains states and the American West. There were sundown towns along the railroads in Montana. Informal or formal. Helena didn't have the sign up at Helena. And this happened right after the Birth of a Nation came out. Helena had a pretty large Asian American population, and they were right out of and sundown towns. And here's a sign from one, the only members of the Caucasian race can buy land here. So I have to tell you a story. My dad grew up in a little town south of Omaha, Nebraska called Louisville. Now, technically, it should be called Louisville, but in Nebraska, they called it Louisville. Down 1,500 people, now it's about 1,000. It's a little town on the Rock Island Railroad, an old railroad that went through there. And it was a railroad town. And during World War II, it was 1942. And in 1942, they had workers coming through to strengthen the roads. You imagine rail lines were used a lot. And many of the workers, a lot of Mexican immigrants and a lot of black workers were working on the railroad. And there was a sign in the town my dad was born on a farm, sharecropper's farm. And when he was 4 or 5, they moved to Louis. His parents did, because they just couldn't afford to keep on the farm. The big town of Louis. And the sign on that town said, no N-word after dark. On the town my dad grew up. And so that sign was up and up till 1951. And these workers were coming in after working on the railroad, coming into town, and a bunch of them went out to the bars, and a bunch of them stayed after dark, a bunch of workers. And kind of a mob of people in Louisville and the surrounding communities all came in and roughed them up, beat them up pretty bad, and then drug one man, whatever, grabbed one man, no one knows why for sure. And they took him to a barbed wire fence and sawed him in half on the barbed wire fence. That's in the town my dad grew up in. And he just couldn't believe it. Now, I know his dad wasn't involved, my great-grandfather was not involved. We know that for sure, because the year after that happened, the Klan burned a cross in my great-grandfather's yard. The local Ku Klux Klan. And my dad remembers stepping over the cross that was collapsed on the Sunday morning that after it happened on Saturday night. And and my grandma telling him, don't say anything. My great-grandfather scared him off with a shotgun. Well, that's what the Klan always do. The Klan burned the cross on this. And one of the things about the Klan, especially the second coming of the Klan, they represented true Christianity. Not these Catholics, or what they thought he was. They thought my grandpa was, but they thought he was a Jew. That's what. He, not that it matters, but he wasn't, but. Yeah, I never met him, he died in Florida. But that's my clan story. Now, let me ask you one thing really quick. Before you leave, I want you to think about this really carefully. Remember the grandfather squads? You remember those Mississippi plans? What would have happened if blacks in the South after the Civil War, that's the 1880s? What would have happened if they would have voted Democrat? Would they have passed the laws? If they voted for the Democrats, would they have passed the law?
Republican plan.
But who was in power? We'll come back. I want you to think about that for a second. Why did they pass the law? 7th period?
Yeah.
For one second. Really? I know he's been announced, I just remember.
So I checked that out. And my super warm.
Let me go back and look at it. Let me jump something down.
Well,
You know, I might have,
because remember, I was nominated between the men.
I do remember that, and I might have thought about it and just forgot to change it.
Okay,
I will check, I jotted myself a note. And it's one of those things, you mentioned, I think, oh, I'll change that, and then I get in my head, I did it.
yeah,
Just as long as you tell me, I'll make sure I get it right.
thank you.
But now you publicly humiliate me from me. So
Sorry.
to me, I'm not.
Did you get mine too?
Yeah, I got it. But I do remember that.
Oh. Ormond here. Maybe I'll be here just listening. I'm ready. Oh, I will. Yes.
I'm hungry.
You have to do that. You should ask. Like, if we can both do that.
What did we get to? Did we get to here? Oh, we got to the nadir race. Okay.
I really thought that, like, I could see both of them, both.
I got 8.
Instead of like, well, I don't want to do that. Wait, you guys go like after school? Yeah, we're doing school clearing. Okay, right? Or at lunch. Yeah, I'm. So and it's like, I'm not gonna be. Okay, ready? Yeah, actually, yeah. Yeah. More like one person is maybe. No, just one, just one. Say it's not a lot of.